And welcome to the fifth chapter. I am Brian Chapman. We've got an abbreviated version of the fifth chapter for you today as we were having some technical difficulties. That means no intro song either, Dennis, but I'm still ready to go. How about yourself?
I'm ready to go. Let's freestyle it.
All right, and we're going to start off with the first chapter. Best case scenario for the 2020 Detroit Tigers. We're talking about an 82 game slate. What are you looking at?
I want to see an all-star emerge from somebody from this team. We talk so much about the young arms, and yeah, we're going to talk about them every time that we get on here. But somebody from this team that we're not suspecting, that some people like you have been calling bust already, like Candelario or Christian Stewart, emerges an all-star. Could Fulmer come back and look like one? Can it be Spencer Turnbull? Could it be Daniel Norris? Can Matthew Boyd be that guy who was looking that way in the first half, but not so much in the second half? I need some all stars. I mean, that's what it's going to be about. We are so focused on the young guys that we haven't seen yet, but there are some guys in this team that really need to emerge if this team is going to end up going anywhere after this year.
Yeah, when I look at a best case scenario, I look at two things. Obviously, the win total, but also I want to see at least two of the highly touted pitching prospects of Skubal, Mize, and Manning prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're ready to be on the opening day roster for 2021 and in that rotation. I want to see Michael Fulmer return to his all-star form in a best-case scenario. I want to see Miguel Cabrera. Obviously, we know he's washed up, but I want to see him hit 300 with at least 15 home runs. We talked about him on Tuesday being in good shape. If he's in good shape in a best-case scenario in an 82-game season, he should be able to hit 15 home runs. Also, I would like to see at least two positional player prospects. All these guys Al Avila's been drafting and acquiring via trades show some all-star potential. They're not going to be an all-star game this year, but I want to look at some of these guys and say, you know what? Maybe in the year 2021 or 2022, whether it's Dawel Lugo or Jamer Candelario, a bust, or Travis Demerit, or an Isaac Paredes, or Jake Rogers, who was atrocious last year, I want to look at one of those and say, wow, this is such a pleasant surprise that I'm not looking at them as potentially being a serviceable starter. I'm looking at them as having all-star potential. And right now when we look at the team, we're looking for serviceable players, and we're looking at Victor Reyes and, not much else. That's a problem.
Yeah, I want to see Castro. That would be nice to see him jump in there. A little bit too much was, being made of was it Harold Castro last year? Like, that's not going to do it.
Both Castros were singles hitters.
Well, the one was a little more highly rated, so let's see him play a great shortstop. Let's see him go.
Yeah, I would love to see that, but look, if he's going to play a great shortstop, I also want to see him hit. And I certainly also don't want to see them play like a bunch of not minor leaguers, but little leaguers, booting the ball around, throwing it over players' heads, whether it's Demerit or Christian Stewart, misjudging fly balls. I'd like to see Christian Stewart look like he's throwing with the correct hand as opposed to the wrong hand because he has no arm strength, but that's probably wishing for too much. In terms of wins, best case scenario, 30 and 52.
Yeah, I would think it'd be a little bit higher than that. I'm projecting 31 and a half when Vegas comes out for an 82 game slate, and I would like to see them, hit closer to 35 than 30. For me, maybe that's wishful thinking, but that's where I'm sitting right now.
All right, Dennis, let's go take a look at some feedback from one of our fans out there. It comes from Keith, and he was asking about the potential for the roster to expand to 30, and also the taxi squad of making it actually a 50-man roster for each Major League Baseball team. And here is what he said to us.
But my question is, I guess, is how you guys feel about these prospects, because I'm assuming with this, a lot of these prospects that may have started the year in AA or AAA will be making that 50-man roster. And if so, I don't know how you think that impacts. Are they going to get a lot of playing time? Is it going to possibly increase their path to the majors, or do you think it may be too early for some of them, but because of the rosters are expanded, that they're going to bring those players that have that potential up and those skills already?
So there you go, asking about that expanded potential roster and whether or not it's going to be too early to see some of those young guys up.
Yeah, I was talking to Matt Shepard a little bit earlier today. We were talking about this very thing about a possible expanded roster, and he said that normally you have the 40-man roster and 25 active. He thought that they might, at least what is being projected right now, carry an extra 5 on the active roster, which and then at some points during a series or heading into the game, kind of like hockey, you would have 5 scratches. So, trying to get it's already difficult for these managers in a 162 marathon, thinking about, hey, we need to get that 24th and 25th guy in there. Now, if you're talking about 26 through 30, you're going to see a lot more and different faces, but they might not necessarily be, the stars, because you need guaranteed innings or you need guaranteed playing time when you're talking about guys that could be playing if you have a double-A season down there. Now, if you don't, maybe those guys will be here.
No, that's a question. What's going to happen with the minor leagues? I think you will see Manning, Mize, Skubal. We don't know what's going to happen when it comes to the innings with these different players, but it's something that all 30 teams are going to be dealing with. They're all going to be bringing up prospects perhaps too soon, so the Tigers might as well be in that same group. Let's turn the page in this abbreviated episode 4 to the second chapter, Dennis.
Yeah, and that's Jeff Okudah. And you know what? The Lions, it's been a little while now since the draft has come and gone, and you look back and see exactly what the Lions got. We've got some video for you here. One of my favorite ones that emerged through the draft process came from Indianapolis at the Combine. There was some young strapping reporter that thought he would jump up and ask a Jeff Rieger type question like, hey, what about these sloppiness or whatever else? And Okudah came right back at him. Let's see that video.
Zero pass interferences, 0 holdings. So cut the tape on the game. I think you might see something else.
And there you have it. I mean, he just
cut
gave
the
it
tape back on.
That's
cut
right.
Cut the tape back on.
Cut it back on.
Yeah, well, the one thing about Okudah, that's what you want to see, some confidence and some brashness from a corner, a little finger waving at the media there. And you know what? When you go back and watch this guy play in his college days here, the last game that he did play was in the Fiesta Bowl in the semifinal against Clemson, and Ohio State got out to that huge lead. And I know if you're talking about the biggest plays of the game, you might want to talk about the very last play where Fields threw the ball one way and Olavo went the other way. Probably the biggest play of the game, but the second biggest play of the game is one that we have queued up, and just look at who is making the big play for the Buckeyes.
Now, it was a scoop and score live, but they did go back and overturn it. It still was ruled incomplete because of Jeff Okudah's ability to break that pass up.
Yeah, well, if you go back and if you listen to Herb Street and Fowler, they're like, no, they did not like that call on the field. You can see, I know you're not an Ohio State fan, either am I, but you could see how you'd be really upset. But the thing about this, from a Lions perspective, is here was a guy who was getting in there, not quite a tomahawk chalk, but definitely getting his hands in there and stripping that ball out to make a play. And at a huge time, man, they make that play. You could easily talk about them, being there at the end and winning that game and playing LSU for the national championship.
Yeah, when I look back at those two videos, the one that stands out is the first one we played from Twitter, from the Combine, where Jeff Okudah said he didn't commit any defensive pass interference penalties and didn't commit any defensive holding penalties. And when I heard that comment, that's when I really started giving him a hard look. I knew that the Lions would be in need of a corner because we all could see the writing on the wall. Darius Slay was going to be out. But when you see that a guy played at a high level at Ohio State with the Deep South Buckeyes, and he wasn't cheating, he wasn't getting called for, a hands penalty here, a hold and grab, he wasn't getting burned and tackling somebody, that's when you really start to say, well, wait a second, maybe this guy is the real deal, a complete cornerback. You hear about how he loves to talk about technique. I mean, my top choice all along was Derek Brown for the Lions with the number 3 pick. He was my 1A, but after that comment, after hearing him speak, he became my 1B, and that's why I thought it was such a good pick. I know a lot of Lions fans said they needed to draft Tua, but I mean, Jeff Okudah doesn't have any question marks, and he fills a hole right now. I thought it was a very good pick.
Yeah, I wish they could have got him at 5. I mean, that's always the thing that we'll talk about, being able to grab that extra pick, but the Lions weren't able to do that. Yeah, for me, if they weren't going to go with Okudah, if they were going to stay there at 3, which I didn't want them to do, Okudah, I completely understand the selection. Isaiah Simmons would have been the other one for me.
And Isaiah Simmons was in that game as well.
Yes, he was. And, one thing that Ohio State has going for them, and it's kind of like Georgia with running backs with DeAndre Swift and, Nick Chubb and Todd Gurley. You just keep going back, the recent lineage that they have through Ohio State. They have, 10 DBs when you look at it. You're looking at Marshawn Lattimore, and you just keep looking at Denzel Ward. You look at all of these defensive backs that Ohio State has in the league. It doesn't mean that Okudah is going to be just like one of these guys. Yeah. What it does mean that when you're a high school defensive back, you are looking at OSU like defensive back U. Kind of like Penn State used to be known as linebacker U.
Yeah, well, I thanks for that. But I just put up, by the way, Micah Parsons is going to be a top 10 pick in the 2020 draft. I think we all know that. But I just put up from NFL Communications website, this has a look at the NFL rosters to start the 2018 season, a breakdown. It shows where players went to college. Obviously, Alabama leads with 44 players, and you see the Deep South Buckeyes with 36, Michigan 26, and of course Penn State with 25. But you go down. They also break it down by position, and you see that, for instance, offensive tackle. TCU is offensive tackle U because they have 6 players in the NFL who are offensive tackles. Look at the Deep South Buckeyes. They've got, like you said, 10 defensive backs, and they are DBU. And not only that, you look at all the other position groups in the NFL in terms of colleges that are leading in those areas. Nobody else is close. I mean, you got Clemson and Texas Tech, each with 7 wide receivers. You got Alabama and Georgia with 7 linebackers, but it's heavily lopsided towards Ohio State in the defensive backfield with 10 of them. And that was one of the other reasons why I liked the Okudah pick so much, is because when Buckeyes in recent years get to the NFL, they stick, they play, and they play well. So you don't have to worry about whether or not Jeff Okudah is going to be a bust unless somehow he gets injured.
Where's Michigan on that list?
Michigan had 26 total players. Oh, I think, I can put that back up there. I think they were like left guard.
O-line U? Yeah, there you go.
They're tied with Iowa for offensive guard U. They have 4 offensive guards, and as far as Michigan State, they're tied with Southern Cal, USC, and North Carolina State for quarterback U, because they each have 3 quarterbacks in the league. Kirk Cousins, of course, being the most prominent of those.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that.
No, I wouldn't have guessed that either. Let's now turn the page to the 3rd chapter, and while everyone is talking about Major League Baseball haggling over money and how they're going to return to action, the NBA is thinking about doing the same thing. Obviously, they suspended their season on the first day of legalized sports betting in Michigan when Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19. We don't know when they're going to return. We do know that the Pistons are 20-46 with 16 games to go. Their 5-game losing streak is the longest current losing streak in the NBA. They've held that for over 2 months. They're 10.5 games out of the last playoff spot. They have the 5th worst record in the league. They're only a half game out of the 2nd worst record and 4.5 out of the worst record in the league, held by the Warriors. Dennis, if the NBA returned to action in June or July, how interested would you be in watching this team play?
Well, not very interested. I would hope that they would just go to the playoffs. You mentioned those 16 games, and if they came back and you're like, okay, hey, here's Piston basketball, I'm sure I would tune in for opening night and see what they would put out there on the floor, and it would be fun to watch, like it would be an opening night of a regular season or something. But quickly, when you look at those standings, you mentioned the 16 games to go. When you start looking at it with the Cavs and T-Wolves, they have the second and third worst records. You say, hey, only 19 wins. You could say, hey, that's pretty reachable for the Pistons. But when you go to the other side, look at Knicks, Bulls, Hornets, Wizards. They have 21, 22, 23, and 24 wins when you start going down there. So what that means is that the Pistons are in a, there's no Zion Williamson, to do what you say, tank like a no limit soldier. But the one thing is, you also don't want to go out there and win 12 of the 16 games or something and end up with the eighth or ninth record. So it's just one of those things, man. Like I just hope they go to the playoffs and the Pistons are sitting where they're at.
Yeah, I mean the standings make it really interesting for the Pistons from that standpoint. Obviously, when I'm watching the Pistons, assuming they get back to action, I'd be looking at them for two reasons. One, Christian Wood, which I'll get to in a minute, and then number two, tanking like a no-limit soldier to improve their draft stock. I'll put the standings back up on the screen, and you mentioned talking about the teams that are just behind them. The Knicks a game behind them. The Bulls, what is that, 2.5 games behind them. And you can go all the way back to the Wizards, who aren't that far behind them, 5 games. But it's so appealing to look at the Hawks a half game ahead, the Cavs a half game ahead, the Timberwolves 1 game ahead, and even the Warriors, especially when you look at what the Pistons did since the Andre Drummond trade. They're 1-12. That is tanking like a no-limit soldier. Silk the Shocker, Mia X, Master P, C Murder, all those guys 1-12. And if they can continue to play like that, there's a chance they could get the worst record in the league, especially because when they return to action, Draymond Green, who's missed 22 games, will be playing for the Warriors. Stephen Curry, who's missed most of the season, will return for the Warriors. They're not going to have the worst record in the league. The biggest problem for the Pistons would be Blake Griffin might return, and Derrick Rose, who stunk in the last month or so before they went on the suspension, especially due to injuries. He might be at 100%, and that could lead them to go in 8-8 or 10-6 in their final 16.
All of that could happen. The most intriguing thing, though, is like somebody like Kevin Durant coming back and getting in with the Nets and how that would work out. One thing, like, just get to the playoffs, man. Thinking about the Pistons coming back one game, it's going to be exciting. And then the next thing you know, you're thinking about wanting them to lose again. Let's wait till next year for, Wow, let's just wait till next year for that.
Are you intrigued by Christian Wood? Because after the Drummond trade, they were 1-12, so lots of fans are probably tuning out. They were losing. But after that Drummond trade, when he got an opportunity to really showcase himself, I mean, he was balling because the trade was made on February 6th. For the month of February, he played like a borderline all-star, 19.3 points per game, 9 boards, 39% from downtown. And in the 5 games in the month of March, even better, 26.6 points a game, 9.4 boards, 43.5% from three-point land. He's going to be a free agent this summer. I'd like to see what he can do.
Well, for sure, in the 2020 NBA space and pace, man, he's the perfect kind of guy. I mean, he can throw it up from outside. He can put it on the floor, and he really can get to the rim. So he's got great quickness. I mean, he's so rail thin, you wonder if he's ever going to be able to put on any size there. But in the new NBA, that's what you're looking for. 25 feet, spacing everybody out and go, and he fits the bill.
Absolutely. All right, let's turn the page to the 4th chapter.
Yeah, and that gets to the NCAA. They say on June 1st that they're opening things up for practice where football and basketball, most importantly here, football. And we do have some video of Charles Barkley talking about how he feels about the college kids getting back out there and being able to practice. Talking about practice.
Breaking news that Division I football and basketball student athletes can participate in on-campus voluntary athletics beginning June 1st. Other sports decisions are expected soon. Are you surprised? Do you think it's safe?
I don't think it's safe, number one, but those are the two money-making sports. I don't think it matters as much for basketball because basketball doesn't start until November. But obviously football starts in August. I just want these kids to be safe. But, Anderson, hey, listen, it's a lot of money at stake. But I do not think it's safe. I would not want my kid until we know more about what can happen. We need to wait until we're closer to a treatment or a vaccine But listen, money is going to run this thing, and that's really unfortunate.
So there you go, Charles Barkley on CNN.
Yeah, well, the one thing about it being safe or not, I get Charles, and I can't tell him, how he should feel about the safety if that was his kid or you, or if it was my kid. But what I can say is that going and practicing for a month and the precautions that they will take, I'm not so worried about a kid or my kid if he was going into to practice at the facility with some of the guidelines that they've outlined, where you're only going to have a few people in the weight room at a time, and then they have to clean everything all up, and then you're out. And I think that's some pretty good. That sounds like, in theory, pretty good precautions. What I would worry about if the kid was going to be on campus and they were headed to the bar in a closed situation, or going to a house party and hanging out there, that would be something I would be more worried about. But at some point, like, all of that's going to happen. So what are we doing? If you're that worried about your kid, and I'm not saying if anybody's worried about him, that's fine. Redshirt them, keep them at home, just take a year off if you're that concerned, because you get colleges back, those kids are all going to be hanging. Of course, I mean, what you think that's part of the college experience?
Yeah.
You think you're going to go to college and say, no, I'm just chilling in my dorm. I'm just chilling in this room. I'm not going out. I'm just going to my workouts where I'm going to stay 10 feet away from everybody and wipe everything down. That's not very realistic. I'm more worried about what's going to be happening outside the facility than what's happening inside the facility.
Yeah, I actually thought that Charles Barkley's point about money was really fascinating, because I was a little bit surprised when I saw that the NCAA was allowing college football, a fall sport, and men's and women's basketball, winter sports, to resume their training activities, but no other fall sports. I mean,
Two
what
biggest
about
money makers?
exactly?
Two biggest money makers.
Exactly, it's about money, and I saw an article, and I'll post it up there so you guys can see as well. I saw an article from ESPN.com that talked about how much money these colleges would stand to lose if there was no football season. And look, you can see right there from the headline, financial toll of coronavirus could cost college football at least $4 billion. And $4 billion is, I mean, that's money that's hard for us to fathom. But you scroll down a little bit further in the article, it says more than 20 FBS athletic departments, including Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, blah, 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 Minnesota, Big Ten school, have announced voluntary pay cuts and or mandatory furloughs for coaches and athletic staffers. And then look at this. It's from TCU's athletic director, Jeremiah Donati. If there's no football season, or if football season is interrupted or shortened, there will be a massive fallout. There would have to be massive cutbacks. Could the department go on? Sure. It would probably look smaller. There would potentially be fewer sports and much less programming. I think that when you look at that, when you look at the possibility of them losing $4 billion and cutting sports and what these schools have already decided to do, I think Central Michigan cut their track program. They're going to do whatever it takes to get football in, and if they can get basketball in as well, because they need the money. And it is kind of strange that they wouldn't try to put those other sports out there, but we might see a situation where football is played, basketball is played, and no other sports are played for a whole year because they're money losers.
Amazing. You just think about how big the United States is, and you just look at some of the different athletic directors and what some of the other commissioners are saying, and it's really different where you're at, depending on where you're at. Out at Stanford, they're talking about, no football in the fall, and you're talking about Auburn's athletic director. He was guaranteeing that there was going to be, he was ready to go out there and play, and West Virginia's athletic director was saying the same thing. So as big as this country are, you have that many different opinions on whether they're going to play football or not, or whether they should.
Well,
And
they
you
also
get
have to
it,
deal with 50 different governors with 50 different regulations. Like I was saying that just in the terms of the SEC, Florida and Georgia, their gyms are open, but Kentucky, SEC state, their gyms aren't open. So what's going to happen on June 1st? You're going to have football players getting ready in Florida and Georgia for the start of the season, but Kentucky players are not going to be able to do so. You look at the state of Michigan, our gyms aren't open, but what if, when you look at this phased reopening, Gretchen Whitmer, a Spartan, says, you know what? In Ingham County, we're ready to go. They can start practicing. In Washtenaw County, way too dangerous. The Michigan football players will get fat and sloppy. Meanwhile, the Spartan players will look like they're ready to go for the NFL Combine.
Well, I know you're being funny, but there'll be some people out there who start talking about the Democratic government, and start talking about Trump coming into Ypsilanti not wearing a mask. I'm not going. I'm not going there. This is an abbreviated show. Let's get to our fifth chapter. That means story time, and I'll go first, chap. I was listening to a podcast with Steve Kerr. He does one with Pete Carroll, the head coach of the Seahawks, Kerr, the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. We talked about them a little bit earlier, but he was talking about analytics with a jump shot, and he mentioned that all of these teams have something that's called a NOAA. It's a system that films and measures the player's arc. So they have this data, and then they have this film. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting when he talked about it, he says it really comes down, it's really about the loft or the arc when you're talking about improving somebody's shot. And it really resonated with me. I did not have a good shot in high school at all. For somebody who was a shooting guard, not having a good shot, that tells you a lot. It didn't add up. But a year out of high school, I remember when I got it, I was just, out there firing up some shots, and I was like, oh, it's the arc, it's the loft. And it really, when I heard Kerr say that, maybe you hear people say that all the time, but when I heard it, I was saying, that is what it's all about. The final touch there, when you're trying to get your jumper and you feel like, hey, now you got it. It's really about that loft and that arc.
Too bad it took you a year out of high school to get
Too
that.
bad, you're right.
You could have been a college star.
Well, I wouldn't have been a star, but I'd have averaged more than a couple points, and I would have I wouldn't have had my high school coach banning me from shooting 3-pointers in a game like he did one time.
Wow. Yeah, that would never happen in 2020. Well, I've got an example of how not everybody out there is using social distancing, because we know we're supposed to, but not everybody's following that. When I was Ubering, this was last month, I picked up a guy at about 3 a.m. I was driving him home, and keep in mind that in the middle of April, that's when the pandemic was at its worst in Metro Detroit. We're having a chat for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then he interrupts me and says, honestly, I can't even concentrate on this conversation right now. I was like, why is that? He said, I just got through having sex, and we were doing X and Y and Z, and I was thinking, well, I didn't say, I wasn't thinking. I said, well, was this your girlfriend, or you must have had a good time with your girlfriend? And he said, I'm done with relationships. It's just some prostitute I found on the internet. And he mentioned some website. And I was like, well, obviously you weren't socially distancing. Get that off the screen. And he said, hell no. And he talked about how it was so much better for him to have a prostitute. And he found this woman with this nice big booty. The price was $100. And he walked in there, and she was telling him, I'm going to use this money for school. And he said, I don't even care about that. I was done in 10 minutes, but I paid for an hour. So she did Y and Z as well. And then he started telling me about how he worked at Walmart, and how because of the pandemic, he was getting a hazard pay, and he was getting $200 extra per paycheck. And I said, so what? You're using $100 per week on a prostitute? He said, yep. So that's how people are using their bonus money, at least some of us. Not everybody is out there being responsible. He not only potentially got coronavirus, but some prostitute specialty viruses.
Well, hopefully he was taking protection to the extreme there, with not only a mask, but some other protection as well, or he could be in real big trouble.
Yeah, that's for certain.
Yeah, all right, chap of this abbreviated show. Coming up on Tuesday, we've got a good one for you, where is it really necessary, if they have the games, to have fake fans in the stands? Faking fans in the stands. We'll talk about that on Tuesday. Don't forget, June 2nd, the big announcement here on the Fifth Chapter.